Hey, I'm Guy Simbarlo from Uncubed, and today we are joined by Raquel Milstein, an immigration attorney based out of New York. Thanks for coming by, Raquel.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And we're going to try to make sense of, can we call it the debacle?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. The recent debacle concerning immigration visas to the United States, and then talk a little bit about how it's impacting tech employers, employees, and maybe some actionable advice they can take. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on, it would be great if we could break down a little bit about what the different immigration visas are.
Okay.
My understanding is that there are two kind of major categories: immigration visas and non-immigration visas.
Right.
Is that
There
right?
are. That's right. So non-immigrant visas are temporary visas. Most of them are temporary work visas, and then the immigrant visas are all green cards.
Okay. So the non-immigrants, that includes the H-1B and
Bs.
H-2B?
Yes.
Is that right? Could you tell us what those are exactly and the application process a little bit?
Sure. So H-1Bs are for specialty occupations. The basic requirements is that an employer is offering somebody, an individual, a job that requires at a minimum a baccalaureate degree. And that individual must have that degree, and it must be related to the position offered. So generally there are 4-year degrees that are required, and the position must be one that is sort of a specialty occupation, if you will. Specialty occupations are these high-skilled workers, is what you're hearing about in the news right now. Generally, they're issued in 3-year increments with a maximum duration of 6 years. One issue that's come up over the last few years, and actually even the last decade, is that there's only a specific amount of visa spots available each year. So currently there are 65,000 H-1Bs available for those who have a bachelor's degree, and an additional 20,000 spots for those who have a U.S. master's degree. However, last year and the year before, there was a lottery because over 200,000 people applied for these H-1B visas, and there's only a maximum of 80,000 or 85,000 available. So there ends up becoming a lottery. So even if you're qualified and even if you have the job offer, more than 2/3 of the applicants aren't even selected for processing.
Absolutely, and that is strictly on a lottery basis. It's a blind choice.
Blind choice, yes.
And how long does that process of applying for that kind of visa, how onerous is it to the applicants, and how long a process is it?
So in general, we start working on all these cases late February and the entire month of March. All applications have to be received the first week of April. So this coming year, April 1st is on a Saturday, so all H-1B visa petitions must be received by April 3rd or that first week. They accept visa petitions for the first 5 days of April. The reason being that you can apply for a visa 6 months before the start date. Immigration Services' fiscal year begins October 1st of every year. So everybody's rushing to file an H-1B in the first week of April, but would not start working until October 1st. Unless they are F1 students with OPT, and then their OPT status is extended through.
OPT?
OPT, optional practical training. It's a work permit that's valid for a year in most cases and is issued to those who received a U.S. bachelor's degree.
All right, okay. And so now let's talk a little bit about the immigration visas. That's the E1, 2, 3, and the EW3. Right. What are those?
So employment-based green cards are EB, employment-based 1, 2, 3. So employment-based first preference, second preference, down the line to fifth preference. EB1s are available to those of extraordinary ability who can demonstrate they've reached a very high level in their field. Also for outstanding researchers and professors, and for multinational executives or managers that are being transferred from overseas in a high-level position over to the U.S. They're the highest priority. They're not subject to any sort of waiting period, whereas EB2s and EB3s are. EB2s are the second preference, and those are available to those who have exceptional ability in certain fields or who have a master's degree. Another way to obtain an EB2 status is to have a bachelor's degree and 5 years of progressive work experience. Most nationals of countries around the world are not subject to a waiting period, but there are waiting periods for nationals of China, Mexico, and the Philippines. And India. And India has probably the longest waiting period of all.
Mm-hmm. How long, like when we're talking about a waiting period?
Every month, the State Department issues what's called a visa bulletin, and they update how long the waiting periods are. In general, it's going to be at least somewhere between 2 to 8 years, depending on the
substantial. Got
category.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. For Indian nationals and EB2s, I believe it's somewhere around 6 years right now. But the visa bulletin for March just came out yesterday. And then EB3s are for those who have a bachelor's degree or no degree at all. So they're for unskilled workers who have an employer who is sponsoring them for a green card, but don't require somebody who has any sort of level of education that requires a bachelor's or higher.
Fantastic. C5, T5, R5, L5, are those something that people deal with?
Don't know what those are.
Oh, wow. Okay. Then I found those on the United States government's visa website.
C5.
C5, T5, R5, and I5?
That's interesting. So the non-immigrant visas
Yeah.
basically go down the alphabet.
Yeah.
A down to U, or V, blah, blah. But so there are C visas, but C/D visas are for crewmen. Think of flight attendants, things like that. So A is ambassador, B is visitor, C, D, crewman, and so on and so forth, which leads you to H's. And then L's, which are transferee visas. And there's a variety of other ones as well.
Absolutely. And then you have green card applicants who are oftentimes being sponsored by their workplace. Is that right?
Exactly, and that's the EB2 and
That
EB3.
is the EB2.
That is the
a
same
green-
thing.
It is the same
Exactly.
thing. Okay, got it. And I wonder also if we could just talk briefly about, is it kind of DACA?
Yes.
The kind of the dreamers, as they were formerly
Yes.
known. If we could talk a little bit about them and their status.
So their status, that's one area where there is a lot of anxiety right now because it was issued with an executive order with Obama. The DREAM Act allows those who entered the U.S. before they were 16 years old to qualify for a work permit and travel permit. It doesn't necessarily give them a status, but it allows them to be employed, and employers will they can get a social security number and they can be paid. But what's required is they enter before they're 16 years old and they either have obtained a high school degree, college degree, or a GED. And then they are issued this card. And they have to have been in the US around the time that the law was enacted. So this is there's a lot of discussion, it might be repealed, things like that. The only update I've received in terms of any actual action is there was a person who was in DACA status who was detained. I'm unsure if it was last night or the day before, and now there's a lawsuit going on because he does have status and he shouldn't be detained as an illegal immigrant.
So let's get to the heart of the matter. On January 27th, Dear Leader issued an executive order that stated, quote, to protect the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States. Now, in addition to the substantial concerns over constitutionality, there were questions of enforcement and the degree to which it was so vaguely written that one day the Department of Homeland Security was saying that we are not going to allow green card holders who are permanent residents into the United States. The next day you have Sean Spicer walking that question back. I'm just curious to know what kind of impact that level of confusion has had on your own clients.
Oh, a significant amount. Even for those who are not nationals of those 7 countries, everybody has a higher sense of anxiety right now. In particular, I have several clients from these nations, and I had one in particular who's Syrian, who received his permanent residence based on extraordinary ability as an EB1. He is a brilliant clarinetist, and he was on international tour at the time. So he immediately was impacted, was incredibly worried about whether or not he could even board an airplane. He ended up getting on the plane. I told him to come into JFK. This is after Judge Donnelly issued her injunction in the Eastern District in Brooklyn, and he had no problems. He had absolutely no issues at all. Of course, there are others who were detained for some period of time and eventually let go, but as a whole, there is a lot more concern and anxiety. And keep in mind, immigrants are already anxious about, regardless of what Trump had done, they had already had a sense of anxiety because they're always in a temporary state until they get their green cards. So it's only heightened that. And now, regardless of where they're from, I have nationals from China today, Ecuador and Colombia, all worried about their statuses, and everybody is trying to file green cards or file for naturalization as soon as possible.
Now, I'm sure you're loath to deal with hypotheticals, but with the possibility that a new executive order could come down any day, kind of redefining this ban, how do you advise your clients to move forward?
In general, if there is a upcoming travel plans they have, I advise them to try to stay put for now. I mean, if they have to travel, if there's sort of sick family members or things like that, they will go. But I try to persuade people to stay for now. A lot of people are, like I said, filing for their green cards or for naturalization now rather than waiting till later, simply because it's better to have a more firm permanent status here in the U.S. at this point. Also, for those who are applying for visas who are not members of any of these 7 countries, there's most likely going to be backlogs and delays in processing, whether it's at the consulates or at the State Department or at the Immigration Service here in the United States. There are so many more filings, and the confusion isn't just amongst the immigrants and all of us, it's also amongst the government officials and those who are issuing visas, because nobody has the clarity right now as to how to process these cases. You know, everything is sort of in flux. So even State Department consular officers who are working at these consulates issuing these visas, they don't necessarily have the clear guidance right now as well. So if possible, try to stay put. Try not to travel. If you can do a change of status if you're filing for a change of status, stay here and do that. Try not to go overseas if you don't need to. Of course, it's easier said than done. Most people have international travel plans. They're all from other countries, right? But that's my advice to most people right now.
So it's kind of like the metaphorical wall has already been built.
Yeah.
But moving the opposite direction. What advice would you offer employers who are dealing with employees who are either uncertain about their own status or in the process of applying for one of these visas?
For the employers, I would say, you know, if they can support any foreign national employees as best they can in terms of filing, you know, permanent resident applications, having them contact immigration lawyers to give advice or provide some counseling to any of these immigrants who are worried. As of now, nothing has changed today, but because there's so much talk about it, and we have from the president to the media to just friends speaking about this, you know, there's so much uncertainty, and the real facts of what's happening isn't necessarily coming through. So I think it's really great to get some solid advice from those who understand the situation right now, and to just be supportive. What I've seen actually in practice lately is employers filing applications earlier than they had planned. So for instance, if an H-1B is expiring in 2018, there are employers who want to file the extension request today rather than waiting to see what happens with any changes that may impact their company or their employees. So people are preemptively filing cases when it's not necessary to do so.
For people who are going through this application process in terms of applying for visas and this kind of thing, is there anything they can do aside from kind of take a Zen-like approach to their status?
Just try to file earlier, because what's happened is because everyone's filing, there are more severe backlogs, even for marriage-based cases, family-based cases, and employment-based cases. So with the more filings, because there's more anxiety, there's just longer waiting periods to get the final results. So the best thing to do is, if there are opportunities to file any type of work visa cases or any type of immigration cases, it's best to do it sooner than you would naturally do it. Allocate, an additional 4 months to processing at a minimum.
Yeah, obviously we're kind of perceiving all of this through the lens of the media and different news reports. You're relatively on the front lines of what's going on now. Is there anything we should know that we don't know, that you feel like isn't getting enough press, that isn't being seen enough in terms of what's going on?
It's interesting. I think that the most important thing is that nothing is happening overnight, especially with the H-1Bs and employment-based preferences categories. These changes take time. So a lot of what's happened is there's a lot of talk and a lot of anxiety, but nothing is happening right now. What's happening is there have been these executive orders to review policy, right? They have 90 days to come back with a report, but nothing is changing immediately, but there is an immediate sense of anxiety. So that's really what I see, is that I think that because of all the talk, everyone has this sense that these changes are imminent because of this ban that happened with these 7 countries. But for most employment-based immigration cases, whether it's temporary work visas or permanent green cards, the changes aren't happening today and tomorrow. They could happen within the next 6 months or a year, but it's not happening immediately.
Yeah, I get the sense that you're almost being asked to act as a therapist as much as an attorney.
I am. I got an email this morning from a client who said, thank you for not just being my lawyer, but also my counselor. So,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of
Daily.
talking people down.
Constantly. Constantly.
Yeah. Do you have any expectations for the future? I don't want to ask you to play seer. But...
It's very hard to say. Well, what I can say is one of the areas that my firm focuses in are extraordinary ability visas. And so what I think will happen is I think that the U.S. will continue to want to bring in talent, right? We want the high-skilled workers. We want talent. So I don't think that category of visas or green cards are going to be immediately impacted. And I think a lot of people who do qualify for the H-1Bs or other categories that have been mentioned in these changes are going to start filing more extraordinary ability cases because those seem like more secure for the time being. Yes.
For the time being.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you feel like is worth getting into?
I just think it's very important to contact immigration lawyers to find out the real truth about what's going on because there's so much talk and not everything is accurate, obviously, these days with the fake news and things like that. So make sure that you get your information from a reliable source. That's the most important thing right now.
Fantastic. Raquel, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
This
Thank
was
you
really
for having me.
informative. Thank you. And we're going to provide you guys with more links and information right below this video. Thanks.